I'm so excited to have this conversation. Reality star Spencer Pratt is running for LA mayor. What everybody's thinking about is this massive street homelessness epidemic that we have here.
There was a viral clip years ago where Gavin Newsom said, let's talk about the real face of homelessness. It's, a lower middle class mother of three just trying to make it, and suddenly they're on the street. And I think that is the popular image of what homelessness is.
I wonder about the fantasy of the helpers, the people who are giving them money and are imagining themselves being these great helpers. If you really want to help, you would think about what's going to work and be evidence-based here and actually put some thought into it. They're not invested in actually effective solutions. They just want to feel good about themselves.
All right, we're back in Open Therapy, the Open Therapy podcast. How are you guys doing?
Hot.
Good, Megan.
Good, but boiling.
Hot.
It's boiling out here.
You're in New York.
Yeah.
You're hot in New York.
Yeah.
Not hot in Cleveland. Hot in New York. I'm in Los Angeles, where we're now into the chilly season. It's the chilly spring. But I'm so excited to have this conversation because we're going to talk about, among other things, street homelessness, the psychology of the people on the street, the psychology of the people helping them and making policies around them. And part of the reason I'm so excited to have this conversation is that I'm here in Los Angeles, where we've got this crazy mayoral race going on. Reality star Spencer Pratt is running for LA mayor, and really a linchpin of the campaign. And what everybody's thinking about is this massive street homelessness epidemic that we have here. There are encampments all over the city, particularly in Skid Row, where it's extremely concentrated and absolutely dystopian. And there's a lot of disagreement about what's actually causing it. Actually, you know what? There's not a lot of disagreement. It's pretty clear that what's causing it is drugs and mental illness, but there are some people who insist that it has to do with housing affordability and income inequality. So, Andrew, I know that you were a caseworker for street homeless.
Well, they were people. I was at
unhoused folks.
It was basically a supported housing residence, so kind of like a halfway house for people who had a long history, usually involving street homelessness, long-term prison or hospital stays, and serious mental illness. So it was people who, the level was, if you could take your meds, keep your room clean, and keep food in the refrigerator, you were ready to move out. So nobody there could do those things, essentially, or they would have been moved out somewhere else.
Okay, so can you describe, what this was in the Bronx, you said, and tell us when this was, and what does the place look like? I think, because I'm always curious, where are these places? Are they in our neighborhoods and we just don't realize they're there? What's the situation? How many people are there? Who works there?
Yeah. Okay.
Lay it out.
Okay. It was about, it was in the central Bronx, really a very bad neighborhood. Not a lot of, no restaurants really. There were some bodegas and stuff and burned out buildings and places, that kind of place. But it was a new building, the residence. I think it was 5 or 6 stories. Maybe there were 60 people there, something like that. And there were 6 case managers. So each person had a caseload of just 10 clients. So, I was working a full-time job managing 10 people. And it was clean. It was well kept as a building. I think they actually ran it as well as they could. The system is, we were there, I don't know how much people are interested in this, but we're the rep payee on their disability. So the disability check from Social Security came directly to us. We would take half of it for rent and other expenses, and then they would get half of it, and they would often get it distributed to them once or twice a week, so that they wouldn't run out. And sometimes I would take trips to the nearby grocery store and actually buy groceries with them to make sure their fridges were stocked. And every little detail was an uphill battle, because I would buy a bunch of groceries for them, and then they would sell the groceries to buy cigarettes, and then come back the next day and be like, I don't have food. What do I do? And so then we'd send them to a food pantry. There was a lot of drug use, a lot of K2 at the time. I think since pot's been legalized, there's not as much K2, which is
what's K2? It's
a synthetic smokable THC. So like when cannabis was illegal, you could like tweak the molecule in THC by like adding a hydrogen or adding a carbon. And it's a different chemical that's technically not illegal now. At least this is what I was told. And so then they would put that chemical on like a artificial smokable stuff, and you could buy it at the bodega. And it basically had the effect of THC, but because it had these chemical alterations, sometimes it would have these really terrible psychiatric and medical effects on people. So it was like worse than cannabis. And people would smoke a lot of that. Their money went to scratch tickets, cigarettes, crack. There was a lot of people smoke crack. And like, it was just like trying to get them basically functional. And they would buy like their money management was like just absolutely atrocious, where, you know, they would buy loosies. They would buy loose cigarettes, which is like $1 a cigarette. And these are people who have $20 a week of discretionary money or something. And they'd buy loosies. They'd buy them on loan. They would get like, the bodega would be like, if you don't have money for the Lucy, we'll give you a Lucy for $2, and then you give me $2 when you actually get it.
A rent to own cigarette.
Basically.
Okay,
so it was like, yeah. So it was a I was just trying to make sure that they had food, that they took their meds so that they weren't going to the hospital, and that they were more or less like not dying. Like that was basically my job. And it was not terribly effective. Not a lot of people moved out to more independent living. Plenty of people went to jail or other situations where they like were kicked out because they were violent or something like that. So it was just like, and it would just, nobody made progress per se. And it was, think about it, one person for 10 residents is managing them. I would help them pay their Con Ed bill. I'd get them a reduced fare Metro card. They'd have an issue with their food stamps, so I'd go down to legal aid with them or whatever. This is the type of thing. So I was constantly taking them to doctor's appointments or things like that, just to basically keep them alive. I mean, at the end of the day.
Andrew, how many of these people you worked with formerly had kind of ordinary lives? You know, how many of them worked 9 to 5s, and you know, in a previous life, you know, were you know, ordinary people? Or did they all have a history of addiction? And
I can only think of one. The men tend to have, they almost all had a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia or a psychotic bipolar or something like that, pretty much across the board. And so men tend to have their psychotic breaks when they're in their late teens, early 20s, which is before they could have a normal life. But that's not necessarily true for women. Some of the women would have breaks later. And one of them had a break when she was in her 40s. So she actually had a career and a normal life, had a psychotic break, and everything fell apart. But that I only knew one person with a story like that.
And these were men and women in this facility?
Yep.
Okay. And what year was this?
This would have been like 2010 to 2012.
Okay. And just to be clear, they're getting like Social Security checks.
They're on disability.
Right?
Yeah.
Disability. Okay. So even people who are on the street qualify for disability, is my understanding.
Yes.
And they can get these checks. They can go somewhere. I'm not really sure what the mechanism was. So like, I know this was a while ago now, but do you remember sort of roughly how much they were getting?
Yeah, it was like $1,050 a month, something around there. But they got Medicaid. They got, which has a $0 copay. You know, they would be getting, you know, a dozen prescriptions a month, but $0 copay. They'd get food stamps. They'd get reduced fare Metro cards. There was a whole slew of like different types of benefits that they would get. But they often, like, they didn't have the cognitive capacity to really manage any of this on their own. There were times where they could get a free cell phone or something, but like a lot of them didn't because they just couldn't manage it. So it's like, and so, there were like benefits that they would just be kind of left on the table, even at the place where we were. But they couldn't, the rent was very cheap and didn't really cover our costs. I think we were funded through the government as well and nonprofit funding, and we had all these different funding sources just to keep this place running.
And was there any barrier to entry? Did they have to be drug free, or did they get drug tested?
No, there wasn't a lot of drug testing, and there were definitely people who used while they were there, without a doubt. But the barrier is that you have to do like a housing application. This is in New York, where you have to have a psychiatric evaluation, and then they have to approve you. And each residence would we don't want the bad ones here. Like, they didn't want the bad ones. They wanted the easy ones. So, like, if you had a history of violence or something, they'd just be like, we don't think it's a good fit. And so people would try to get rid of certain hard to house people by making their symptoms seem like more mild, or they've improved a lot or something, to try to hopefully get a place that would take them. But each unit, which are run by all these different nonprofits, like, there's not just one organization, and they would want to get the easy ones. So you'd have to go for an interview, you'd have to submit an application, you'd have to have a full recent psych eval, and it would take like 6 months. It was so hard. And like a lot of this is even true at a lot of the hospitals for people with like long-term hospital stays, where the hospitals are trying to get rid of people too and get them housed so that they get off the unit. But it's hard to get a place, and it's very time consuming. So they'd find something halfway, and then, it was and we were using, this is 2012, we were using fax machines to fax the psych evals to people. Presumably HIPAA wouldn't let you email at the time because email was considered unsafe. So everything was through the fax machine. It was just such a dumpster fire really of a system. But yeah, that was
hard for me to imagine. Like, if the argument is poverty or income inequality, if you mentioned 1,050, if that was quadrupled or more, it's hard for me to imagine how these people's lives would change very much.
It wasn't really, and none of
struggling, suffering.
Yeah, I mean, it was like the best intervention that I remember, and you could really see it work. I mean, it was very impressive to me. The best intervention was getting a job. So there was an employment person who would try to get you, and they didn't. The interesting thing was they didn't really make money off of the job. So because for every $2 you earn in income, you lose $1 of benefits. So and you pay taxes,
right? And
then you are commuting on the subway to work a 3 or 4 hour shift at minimum wage, and you're getting a 50% tax on top of that. And then they're like, well, you also have to buy your uniform. So whatever it was, and there were people who one person had kids and he owed child support, so they'd take another 30%. By the end, he was making effectively 25 cents an hour after you basically took everything off. And it was but he still liked working. Because it's he was doing something and he was together and he's respectable and it's they would want to work for 25 cents an hour to have the self-respect that comes with working. Some of them, obviously, not all of them, but it was so, and you could see that once they had that structure and that motivation, their symptoms would get better. It was the most effective intervention that I saw, bar none, was the employment program.
Interesting. So that would be an argument for the kind of income inequality, economic reason.
Well,
the idea that this is because of late capitalism or something.
Well, I think of the people who are street homeless, it really is upward over 80-90% have severe mental illness. That means a psychotic disorder, effectively, something, a very, very, not depression, not generalized anxiety, a severe, and usually a trauma history on top of that, and substance history on top of that. So there's there's all of those at the same time. So they're incredibly disturbed, and it really is primarily a mental health issue. But the problem is do you force them to live in government-run institutions and then they're not allowed to leave? That is in a form of incarceration. and it's effectively incarcerating people for mental illness. Like that's at least the argument against that. And how do they get out? Like, if they do well and they want to do better, do they get a second chance? And how many chances do they get? And these government-run institutions are as bad as you would imagine, like corruption, abuse. They've been terrible. So there's a real argument that no, the government is not great at running these. They are a lot like prisons. They are super dysfunctional. And so there have been these attempts to find alternatives like Housing First, or these supported housing programs, or we have these ACT teams where they would do treatment, let you live on the street, but have a treatment team that would contact you and monitor you. There were all these different systems that come, and my sense of them was the efficacy of basically everything was really low. It was so demoralizing.
The academic kind of criminologist perspective on incarceration for violent criminals, it's not, you don't incarcerate them to punish them, right?
Yeah.
They shy away from retributive justice. It's about confining them to protect the rest of society. I wonder why that same logic isn't applied for involuntary commitment for the homeless. It's not we want to imprison these homeless people because they need to be punished for this affliction they're not responsible for. Rather, it's to protect the broader society. But I seldom see that connection made.
I actually, this is maybe really harsh. I think they probably do need to be punished for some of the behaviors they engage in. And the reason is they respond to incentives. And if there isn't a consequence for their action, it doesn't shift. And even if you're on the inpatient unit, where they're on your unit, they are incarcerated, and a lot of them were involuntarily in the hospital unit. There still needed to be disciplinary procedures for people, especially if they became physically violent. There needed to be systems with consequences and punishments in order to address, disruptive and aggressive behavior. And on the supported housing unit too, there was our form of punishment was to call 911 and have them hospitalized. They would be this is an emotionally distressed person. We need to take them to the hospital. And they hated going to the hospital because they'd be held there involuntarily for at least 72 hours. And they really didn't want to go. And that was the punishment. But there was always a need to have some type of rule-based system with punishments. And I think that's probably true for street homeless as well.
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear so many people who have recovered from this kind of situation say the only thing that saved me was getting arrested. You hear that again and again, and it's frustrating because it seems like it's this all or nothing thing. We're so haunted by the kind of state hospital asylum system of the kind of pre-Reagan era, when they decided that there was enough medication and that there was going to be community outreach, and they were going to change the model, and they were going to empty out the hospitals and let everybody on the street. And frankly, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest probably did a huge amount of damage to whole
Can I say
landscape.
something about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? So electroshock therapy, okay. It's not what people think. And
now it's not. Right?
I don't think it was used punitively even back then. Maybe I'm wrong, and there were instances of that, but it is considered one of the most effective treatments for severe depression. It's never a first-line treatment, but a lot of people get it voluntarily because it is more effective than antidepressants at depression. And there's plenty of people who've tried every antidepressant on the market and every type of therapy for 5 years, and they're still suicidally depressed every day, and they get electroshock, and it works. And I've just seen that happen enough to say, don't ban this, at least.
But they put you to sleep. It's a kinder, gentler electroshock therapy. It's not the
I've seen
putting cattle prods on your
head,
really, and convulsive.
You are asleep, but I have seen it, and it is not fun to watch. It is upsetting to see.
But you're asleep.
But they're asleep. Yeah.
Okay, you're not put in a straitjacket and dragged.
But it is used
torture chamber
in New York. Electroshock is legal it's without consent. You can give it to people without consent, but it's almost only used for catatonic schizophrenia. And this is a form of schizophrenia where people like freeze up in postures. And you would see people on inpatient units like this, and they'll be in a weird posture and they'll hold that for hours. You kind of wonder how they have the muscle strength to do it or what's happening, but they're just like rigid and they don't really talk. They struggle to eat or function. And it often doesn't respond well to medication, injections and things like that. But they'll give them electroshock therapy, they'll give them ECT, and it will reduce those symptoms. And so, but they can't consent because they can't talk. So we would meet with the families, we'd talk with them, we'd be like, look, we've tried every medication, and they'd be on the unit forever because we'd try everything first before ECT and it didn't work. And then we'd finally meet with the family if there was one, and we'd say, look, I think this is what's going to work. And often the family would say, yeah, that makes sense. And it would work. It's like, but when you hear electroshock without consent on the it's like people think they get it the wrong impression.
Right.
We get it from Hollywood.
They get it from Hollywood.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
There is a very dark legacy of these kinds of hospitals, but it does seem like with what we know now and with enough will, you could create treatment facilities that were much more humane and effective.
Yeah.
I mean, and another thing too is that, and I've had guests on my podcast and I've talked about this a lot, is that there's new drugs, fentanyl, but particularly methamphetamine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Even in the last 5 years, the purity level of methamphetamine has changed dramatically. It's so much more potent, and it has essentially this effect where it makes you instantly psychotic. So a lot of what we're seeing on the street, you might think is schizophrenia, and often it is, but it could also just be people taking these new kinds of drugs. And I think that has dramatically increased the street homelessness population. I mean, I used to think, wow, there's a lot of schizophrenic people around. There's a lot of schizophrenic people in the world because I'm seeing hundreds of them every day. And actually, no, it's methamphetamine. So
interesting.
Again, I think that changes the equation. And I just think that people have reached a point where they're done. Like we're not gonna keep pretending that these kinds of harm reduction models, housing first, just get them into shelter, get them into their own apartment or some kind of living space, and then meet them where they're at, and then on their own time they can try to
my take on
deal
it
with the addiction.
My take on it, I'm sorry to be like this is a black pill, but I've seen these different treatment models, and there is a certain type of person that housing first can work for. I'm not sure that we're great at identifying beforehand who it's going to be good for, but there are some people who respond to just get into apartment first and then do the treatment after. Then there's another type of person who that's going to be terrible for them. And then there's the other model of you've got to get clean before you get the housing. That doesn't work for a lot of people. And so then it's like, you just look at all the different interventions that are out there and they all seem to have like low efficacy. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, maybe that is an argument for just like incarcerating people, but it does I think that the fantasy, I don't know what that system would look like. There'd have to be some way of they get treatment for a certain period of time, and then they get an opportunity to live independently, and then if it doesn't work, they get housed, they get in a hospital longer, some type of system like that. But it's it's crazy how bad the treatment options are. At least that's been my it was such an uphill battle, and so much of it was just they wouldn't take their meds, and they'd smoke crack, and they'd smoke do all these drugs, and it's it seemed like they were trying to remain psychotic. It was.
Did you have drugs like Suboxone and that kind of thing at that time?
Yeah, there were only a couple people that were taking that, but it wasn't.
Because
it wasn't. Actually, I don't know. I might have it mixed up, but Suboxone is kind of replaces methadone but it like
it's
it was there were a couple people that took it, but it wasn't like a majority by any means.
Oh, because my understanding is that those kinds of interventions have gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
Just in the last maybe decade.
They were really stringent with which psychiatrists could prescribe it. Like you had to get a special license to prescribe it in New York. I don't know if that's still the case, but like, so no one prescribed it. There were like 4 guys that did it. I don't know why they were so careful about not letting people prescribe it at that time, but
the reason I asked earlier, Andrew, about how many of these people lived ordinary lives before, I think that is the popular image of what homelessness is you have an ordinary person who maybe suddenly suffered from mental illness or had a financial catastrophe, and then the next thing you know, they're sleeping on the street and using drugs, and their life unravels. I remember there was there was a viral clip years ago where Adam Carolla interviewed Gavin Newsom, and they were talking about homelessness, and Gavin Newsom said, "Let's talk about the real face of homelessness. It's a lower middle class mother of 3 just trying to make it, and suddenly they're on the street." And I've seen that a couple of times, but very rarely. Usually it's not that. It's someone who very clearly seems to have been unwell for many years. And has maybe never been a kind of a normal, functional, integrated member of society.
We had and not everybody knows about the services, but there was like Legal Aid Society used to run something. I don't know if it's still around, but it was called Single Stop. And you could kind of go in and be like, what are all the benefits I qualify for, and how can I get all of them based on my situation? But somebody who's in that type of situation can like stop into at least like one place, get everything they need in terms of housing and financial and food support that they need to get through their current situation. And they're, at least in New York, and I'm assuming it's similar in California, there's a lot of a stopgap against that sort of thing happening.
See, this is a thing I never understand, because if you are, genuinely in need, if you are a mom with kids or whatever the situation is, and you are not addicted to drugs, you are not mentally ill, is it really impossible to get help? Because often I hear, well, no, there's a backlog, or there's no shelter beds, or I tried, and somehow the bureaucracy is broken. But I also hear that there are beds available. I mean, then we start getting into this conversation about the NGOs and this labyrinth and perverse incentives.
Like, everything that happens before that point, because, like I was poor for a little while, but, I always had a couch to sleep on. There was always a friend or a family member or someone somewhere I could have crashed.
And that counts as homelessness, by the way. The couch surf. I mean, there's different cohorts.
Right.
The couch surfers are a contingent of homelessness. But yeah, exactly. There is that population.
A lot has to go wrong in your life before you start sleeping on a sidewalk or start seeking a shelter for the homeless. I just like what happened before that. Like with their family, with their friends, with their community, with their loved ones. Like how did you get to the point where you couldn't crash in someone's living room floor or sleep on a cot somewhere with your buddy? And that clearly to me indicates addiction, mental illness, like you had to burn a lot of bridges and probably had sort of very tense and difficult relationships with people where they probably trusted you and you betrayed them in some way, which often happens with addicts. But then the discussion is always around, well, how do we fund more homeless and shelters and more funding for these people, or how do we get back on their feet? But I always wonder, what happened to the community? What was going on with them beforehand? And it all just feels kind of dishonest in a way.
I have heard from a lot of different sources that the shelters, you never want to spend a night in a shelter. I mean, not that people need to hear that.
Is that because of the other people living there? I heard about this too. Like a friend of mine who worked in some homeless shelters, and he told me that part of the reason why a lot of homeless people don't want to go into a homeless shelter is because they're afraid of the other homeless people, which makes sense because
of course
there's always going to be someone a little more violent. And even if you're a violent, crazy person, there could potentially be someone even more violent and more crazy in that shelter.
And you're not outside and you can't get away from them. I mean, I do understand and feeling safer on the street.
But that does also kind of seem like it would be a problem that would be easier to solve. Like it seems like, how do we make these safe so that nobody at a shelter is concerned for their physical safety, or like their belongings aren't going to get stolen and they're not concerned for their physical safety? That seems like a solvable problem. I don't really understand why the shelters seem to do such a bad job on that issue. There might be more complexity I'm not seeing, but that doesn't seem That's always really surprised me, that you'd rather be in one of those encampments. And what I'm guessing is that there are these informal kind of semi-policing systems that emerge within the encampment villages that are actually more effective at keeping people safe than within the shelter system. I don't know how it works, but it must be something along those lines, which is interesting to me. But
I mean, certainly on Skid Row, I mean, this is in Los Angeles. It's like a 50 square block area that is just tent after tent after tent. I mean, this is like Mad Max kind of thing. And what I've learned is that at least half of the people down there are not even technically homeless. They are drug dealers, drug cartels, human traffickers, people trafficking women. There's this whole absolutely just horrific animal abuse stuff that's now coming to light. Again, now, I mean, fentanyl being tested on dogs being bred and sold for drugs. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking. And so, so yes, there is some kind of, hierarchy, and there are people patrolling other people, but not in a good way. And also the reason that it's down there is because that's where the shelters are. That's where the midnight mission is. And that is where there are soup kitchens, and in the morning they will get in line and get their breakfast. And you can sort of technically get 3 square meals a day, but you're still living in your tent. You're doing drugs.
So my sense of like where the system really seemed to break down is like when someone with a mental illness commits a crime, the system like collapses. And I saw a good example of this was I was on an inpatient unit. Again, this is in a hospital inpatient unit. It's not on the street. And it's like there was a person there who was huge, like a 6'6" black guy, super psychotic and super aggressive, and he would violently attack people, mostly other patients, but sometimes staff. And they would like file police reports. Like my supervisor there, I think he kicked him or something, my supervisor, and they wanted to like, he filed a police report. He's like, you should do, like, this is a violent crime, you should do something about this. And they're like, well, he's here. And the police were kind of like, no, like, he's here. So he's not our problem. He's the hospital's problem. And then the hospital doesn't really have like punitive systems that are appropriate for like felony assault, which this person was committing a lot of. And it just kind of it all break down. So it's kind of like, okay, if there are people in these encampments and they're all committing felonies, or a lot of them are, it's like you arrest them and they can get treatment, but they should be arrested. And I don't know why, when it's somebody who has mental illness, they think, oh, well, now the law enforcement system doesn't apply. That seems to be the key piece.
Well, it doesn't apply to anybody in these states. They won't enforce the law. I mean, a felony, it's a misdemeanor to shoplift less than less than $1,000 worth of stuff. If you shoplift, it's only a misdemeanor.
So I just want to again point out this weird inconsistency where my guess is they don't want to apply the law because it feels unfair to these people. They're suffering from mental illness, and therefore they should not be held accountable. But again, the reason why we incarcerate mentally healthy people is not to punish them, but to remove them from society so that they don't hurt other people. So, like, why can't we continue to apply that same logic for people who are mentally unwell? It's not to punish them or hurt them or something. It's so that they don't hurt the people around them, often people who are also mentally unwell.
Yeah, and even creating a public disturbance. But so is that really what the system is that they're just the police are not willing to.
The police, their hands are tied. They can't.
And so who's making this decision that we don't?
It's policymakers in states. I mean, you've got states like California, probably New York, that are one-party rule for decades. I mean, you're from California, Rob. So I'm sure you know this as well as anyone.
My mom lives in San Jose. There, like 7 years ago now, there were no encampments, at least within the vicinity of where she lives. And now there are 2 or 3. I think some of them have been closed down, but no, they cropped up. COVID during the riots during that whole period, and yeah, they've had a very difficult time removing them. Although with the new mayor, so she's in San Jose. So what's the guy?
Right, Matt Mahan.
Matt Mahan.
Yeah. Well, he's running for governor, though.
Yeah, and he seems like a sensible, normal Democrat. So yeah.
I mean, but again, and a lot of this too came about a lot of this is post-COVID development because you have this normalization of people outside. There were tents. I mean, there was this idea that every kind of law was relaxed at that time. Kind of all bets are off. We're not going to arrest people for the things we used to arrest them for. And then I think you combine that with these new drugs. It was just kind of a perfect storm. But I mean, to answer your question, yeah, I think there's ideological capture kind of at the top, with people who are making these laws. And then that just trickles down into law enforcement not being able to do their job. There's terrible morale in police departments.
Right.
Because why would they bother to arrest somebody when the chances of them getting in trouble for something are high? I mean, I literally the other day, because there's where I live, this stuff is all over the place. I know probably shouldn't say too much about this. I know there's a drug dealer in a particular place because when I go running, I run by there quite a bit, and it's obvious what's going on. And there was a police patrol car literally across the street from where this drug guy is. And I went over and I said, hey, guys, you probably know this. Not trying to do your job for you. Not trying to splain to you, officers. But there's this guy selling drugs right here in this garage. And they go, well, we're from a different precinct. And so we're actually here, just sitting here. They were like supposed to be guarding like this train station, whatever. They're like, well, this is out of our jurisdiction. We can't do anything about it. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do something about it? And they're like, well, call the Crime Stoppers hotline. And I said, and actually, what about the animals? Because just earlier that very same day, I had walked past this guy who was smoking crack or fentanyl or meth or whatever it was. And he had a cat on a leash, attached to him and then attached to a fence. And it was absolutely just disturbing and depraved. Nobody was doing anything about it. It was in front of a CVS. This goes on all the time. And I said to the officer, what am I supposed to do about the animal situation? If you see this, what am I supposed to do? Because I see it all the time, usually dogs. And they said, well, it's really tricky because it's considered personal property. So unless we can document somebody actively abusing the animal, there's nothing we can do about it. Now, that is the reason that Spencer Pratt, reality star, has gained so much traction in his bid to be mayor of LA is that he is actually just, speaking in a very sensible, normal way about what everyone can see with their two eyes, that the rest of the, any kind of policymaker, elected official has just denied is going on. So that's what we're dealing with. Nobody can do their job.
You're such a Karen, Megan.
I'm a Karen, I know.
Caring about dogs, caring about your community.
I know. A typical white childless white lady. Yeah.
But there's this I do think that's interesting because it's like, so maybe the Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, there's a kind of outsourcing of the policy around this to these NGOs that have weird ideologies.
Totally.
I heard an anecdote about, I want to keep this anonymous, but that somebody who was very involved with homelessness in an American city, and her organization wanted to show that what was the point of this? But basically, they appointed somebody who had active schizophrenia to run it, and then they couldn't
exactly.
because this is about equity or something.
So it's about their lived experience.
And then she just clearly couldn't handle the finances and how to run this, and so there was so much ideology that was just supplanting common sense. I do think I worked this job as a case manager after college, and it was I don't know who would take this job. I don't know why I took the job. I mean, it was I was interested in it. I felt motivated to it, but it was I could have made more money waiting tables easy. And who's gonna pick doing this? It is so draining and potentially dangerous and overwhelming. And there's a certain type of person, and people get burnt out really fast. So who's gonna stay in that job for a long time? Somebody who maybe can't keep a job waiting tables.
Or young, idealistic, fresh college grad.
Yeah, they'll
Well,
do it
you
for
get
a
a
year
lot
or
of
two.
that.
You'll do it for a year or two, but they burn out and like they do something else because it's just the money is you don't make anything and it's so. And then you don't make. If I was really making a lot of progress and I could say like, oh, all these people had this life change, like that in itself too. But to not see the progress and to deal with all the chaos and to not make money. There's only a certain window where somebody can do that. Like
Andrew,
And this is.
I'm curious, like, what you, like, did your experience match your expectations? Like, you know, whatever you expected going into that role versus what you actually saw. You know, was it more or less, you know, were those more or less aligned, or was it very different than what you expected?
I thought that like it was hard to say how much was self-destructive and how much was like cognitive impairment, like and how much like real cognitive problems were playing a role. One of the clearest articulation of this was like I couldn't stand that my clients were blowing all of their money on scratch tickets, and I was like, this is something where you played enough, you're guaranteed to lose money, and I was like, don't do this. So I got a gambling intervention that was like, how do you address this type of gambling use? And I got the pamphlet to like review with my clients, and it was basically math was on it. Like it was like, if you flip a coin, there's a 50, it was basic, you know, basically elementary school math about this is why you're going to lose. And like, they didn't know that. Like, it's like, you could say it's self-destructive, but it was like, I think they thought if you've lost a lot, then you're due. And, you know, this type of thing, like they didn't understand the basic math of it. They didn't understand like, hey, you know, if you buy a pack of cigarettes, you can have them. And if you get them on loan, you're going to pay 4 times as much per cigarette. And that's the like just stuff like that. That was there was a lot of self-destructiveness and like self-sabotage, but there was also like, I couldn't believe like just like the cognitive issues that were holding them back, like basic functioning skills that like.
Yeah, I wondered about like if that burnout is maybe due to just being crestfallen when you see what it's actually like. Like if you go into it knowing the vast majority of these people you're not going to be able to help, or maybe once in a while you'll have a success case. But I would imagine for a lot of young people, they go into it thinking like, oh, I'm going to change some lives. These people are going to get better with my help. And then when that fails,
but that's what therapy is much more the latter, where most people show improvement over the course of treatment. It's not always a total, but you see steady improvement across your caseload. Was pretty typical, and that's one of the reasons why it's more satisfying to work. But like other things like cashing out food stamps was like, if you were going to cash out your, like you'd go to the grocery store and basically you buy someone else's groceries and they'll give you cash that's less than the value of your food stamps, and they would, you know, for $100 in food stamps you'd get $30. That was the rate.
And they would buy drugs. What generally would they buy?
Yeah,
with that money?
drugs, cigarettes.
Yeah. Did you have a sense that they sort of thought they were beating the system, or did they think that they were somehow scamming you? Like what did they say about what they wanted to get out of any of this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was really maybe it's too hard to like generalize too much, but I think I was like the face of an institution, and I can really imagine how like a 22-year-old, you know, comes across to some of these people, like coming in trying to give them advice about how to spend their money, and it's just like it's really cringe, and like and so, but there was like a real demoralization, and I think they didn't necessarily feel like they would complain about a lot of things that they didn't necessarily want to have change. They just had anger and they'd vent it, but they weren't necessarily motivated.
You guys brought up NGOs earlier, and I've read online, like the more sort of ideologically motivated ones, that they have an incentive to keep homelessness in place as it is. Same with the encampments. And the idea here is that, again, they have an ideology, they believe in late capitalism, and they want to create visible eyesores of the failures of capitalism. So they keep the encampments going. I've read stories online about, and Megan, you probably know more about this than I do, that a lot of these NGOs will send like they'll send money to the encampments. They'll order pizzas and have them sent. They'll keep them sort of some infrastructure in place, the porta potties, like all of this stuff. Like, where are they getting the money for all of this? Well, these NGOs want these encampments to continue. So that the broader population sees, income inequality and poverty, and look what's going on here, and we need to have an economic change, and 3 question marks, and then the socialist revolution.
I'm not sure it's so much that. It's not even that macro. I think it's that, and again, I'm not an expert on this, so I want to be pretty broad strokes here. But I mean, the NGOs are incentivized to keep the need going so they can keep getting government funding. I mean, there was an audit in California. I mean, it's billions of dollars in NGO funding for homelessness that has gone unaccounted for. So I mean, I don't even think it's like we're going to all conspire so the revolution comes. It's just that this is an incredible business model. I mean, I hate the word grift. It's totally overused. Yeah. But it is a grift.
I don't think all of them have this kind of. They're not participating in a conspiracy to trigger the socialist revolution. But
I don't even think that's on their mind.
There's also even on the. I'm sure a lot of them get a lot of philanthropic support and donations and stuff. And there's something about what clicks for donations. And somebody who's homeless, that is just always going to get donations. People that don't know what your organization do, what your organization does, they see like a kind of like a sad homeless person or something, they want to help, and people will shovel money into it. And they're not looking over your books and comparing, what's the effectiveness according to control groups on this? Nobody's doing it. It takes a pretty sophisticated donor to actually think about what your organization's doing and the long and short term effects.
Well, the donor is the taxpayer, because these are government contracts. I'm sure that so they are going to get paid as much for an empty bed,
right?
That's
a different
bed with somebody
system
in
too.
it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's a lot of what's going on. But I mean, I guess a lot of people have this fantasy that there could be some kind of, a campus could be built and it would have wraparound services, and there would be, it would be thought out very carefully, and they could go outdoors, and there would be places for their pets. And I mean,
the logic of Housing First was one of the best arguments for it was it's cheaper than the average number of hospital nights they're going to stay if they stay on the street. That there's so much emergency room overnight type stuff that the homeless encampment residents use, and those are so expensive that like you can just get them an apartment for that cost, and you'll save just on the hospital costs. That was part of it. Yeah. I don't think it ended up quite mapping out that way.
The apartments are $750,000, per 200 square foot unit. So
the hospitals are outrageous. $10,000 a night, and you're but like. That's what people don't understand in terms of like how much the residential treatment programs cost. If you've got to have nurses, you've got to have psychiatrists, you've got to have doctors, you've got to have staff, you've got to have like security, you've got to have infrastructure. These are not cheap housing projects at all.
But we've already lost billions to stuff that isn't working. Yeah. The argument is that the money is there. It is just being spent.
Oh, well, I'm sure that's
very,
true.
very foolishly. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and again, obviously this is naive, but it seems like in a lot of these cases, to your point, people, they have jobs, they have a purpose in life. It's meaningful. Why couldn't there be some kind of like, maybe there is, you do go here involuntarily, but it ends up being a place that it's a kind of like very positive sort of inpatient, treatment campus with many different levels. And I don't know. I mean, this sounds pie in the sky, but considering the amount of money that's been wasted, why not think about how that might work?
Well, I do think there's something about there is a kind of ineffective, like leave them on the street and treat them in the encampment approach that I think doesn't. And it's like, one thing I would also say that like I think is really important is the quality of the life of the other people around is a variable. Like, you do care, obviously you care about what the best treatment outcome is for the people who have mental illness or are homeless, and you care about them, but the quality of life of other people in the neighborhood has to be a concern too. That's something that seems like it's almost like people are afraid to acknowledge that matters. And that really, that's not.
I think it's starting to change. No, yeah, you get shamed, or like, oh, you can't. What, you're such a privileged person. You have no compassion.
No.
I just think, again, homelessness has so many different cohorts. Rob, you have technically been homeless. The person who is couch surfing is homeless. The person who is sleeping in their car is homeless.
Right.
The people who are living on the street in this particular way, a lot of them actually do have families that are desperate to get them into treatment, or a lot of them have come from other places because, it's better weather or there's more services here. I think we need to stop calling them homeless. We need to call them drug addicted street campers, quite honestly, because that's, especially in places like, I keep talking about Skid Row, but it is an acute crisis. Those are not homeless people. They are drug addicted street campers, and they will tell you they are choosing to be out there. They won't go home. They won't go to their families. They won't go into a shelter. They want to be out there. I mean, they've got tents with generators, and they've set up like little filthy villages.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not, and then you've got these kind of, very progressive city council people saying like, well, this is a community and we need to respect this community. No, it's not. It's actually the drug addicted, mentally ill population is being controlled by drug dealers and, frankly, gangs. I mean, it's absolute human exploitation, and it's a humanitarian crisis, and it's got to be talked about that way.
I'm kind of riffing on this, but it does seem like you should be able to have a couple of different organizations with different treatment models that you're evaluating based on who has the best outcomes based on the cost, and that you could actually have a competitive system here that could be evaluated based on evidence. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's happening at all, but it's like,
how important is, when you're talking about, these campuses or these shelters, these places where these homeless people can be held. I mean, how important is the issue of confinement and involuntary commitment? Because even if you do create some kind of utopian structure for these homeless people, how many of them would want to stay there? I mean, if you have to stay there, you have to be clean, you have to behave in a certain way, but that if you wander off, you can, go back to living your old life and find drugs and mischief. And I can imagine that would be very tempting, even if, they were fed and watered and sheltered and everything. If they don't have the drugs or the cigarettes or I guess the cigarettes are fine, but, if they don't have the drugs or the booze or any access to substances, or just the freedom to act as they want, living in a place where you have to follow rules, that seems to be an issue. And
I think most people at this point are like, then jail. Like, we're going to offer you treatment that is effective and compassionate and tailored to your needs. And if you reject it and you go back out onto the streets and live illegally and commit crimes, you go to jail.
Yeah.
Like, why is this why is this population allowed to do things that if any of us did, we would immediately be arrested?
I know. There is this real, I think it's this breakdown of like the mental illness versus and committing crimes. And there is even things like the insanity defense don't quite, I don't know. I have like concerns. Like, it's like, okay, well, if you were insane but you killed somebody, then you should go to a mental hospital. Like, you don't have to go to jail, but you should still be incarcerated somewhere. Like, it's a weird idea that there's no punishment or you're punished. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It totally breaks down.
Well, it's a protected class.
Right.
I mean, this population has been, identified as a protected class.
Is there a legal issue here? Is there like a Supreme Court issue? Like when they deinstitutionalized people in the 70s, was that a Supreme Court? I don't actually know, but like,
I don't know.
I think there might be
Good
a
question. legal
issue that might even be up to the Supreme Court, potentially.
I think it's a state. Street camping. It is actually illegal to sleep on the street in most places. It is illegal, but they just stopped enforcing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Did either of you read the Best Minds a couple of years ago? Jonathan Rosen. So this guy, he writes about his best friend who he attended Yale Law School with.
Oh, right.
And his friend is diagnosed with schizophrenia. But this was, I believe it was in the late 70s or the early 80s when this was occurring. And there was this fashionable trend of treating mental illness as or destigmatizing mental illness, that actually, maybe he's not the sick one, but it's society that's sick. And this was the era of Thomas Saz and R.D. Laing and all of these ideas around, society makes you ill, this kind of thing. And then eventually, so Jonathan Rosen describing his best friend, the long story short, spoiler alert here, but his best friend gets married. His wife is pregnant, and he's increasingly showing signs of mental illness. And then and he keeps accusing his wife of being an imposter, of saying, "What did you do with my actual wife? Who are you?" One day he comes home and sees his wife who's pregnant and thinks that she's someone else, and then stabs her and kills her. And so she and the baby both die. And this, the whole book is like this story of failure. All of these people around him who could see what was happening, but they, refused to believe their lying eyes, and they bought into the fashionable dogma of the day. And I feel like we still have this hangover from that time of, it's not the sick people who need help. It's the rest of us who need to rethink or reimagine how we're approaching mental illness.
Well, it's funny because the supervisor who I said who was kicked by a patient and tried to press charges and it didn't work. He said the mental institution in the in New York City is the subway. The subway is our mental hospital. Like we don't put them in the hospital, so they're on the subway. And I
How long ago did he say that? I mean, that seems that way lately, but wasn't there a period where that kind of...
No. I mean, as long as I've been here...
did it kind of abate?
I guess that would have been about 10 years ago. No.
So when de Blasio showed up.
It totally shifted. It was really just markedly shifted when de Blasio took over, and all of a sudden there was a lot more people on the street. And it just seems like that's the argument of like, there's a specific policy that's supporting this stuff, because you could see that it was not that way under Bloomberg, and then it shifted. And I don't know.
Wasn't that way under Giuliani either.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I have heard people make the argument that as soon as word gets out that the law is going to be enforced, within 2 weeks, half of this population will have hit the road, because they were only down there in an opportunistic mode anyway. Like these are dealers. These are people taking advantage of this population. These are people who would then be motivated to go home. I mean, I have a lot. That's the other thing, is like I said this earlier, a lot of these people have families, and they have alienated them. Yes. But those families are desperate to get their loved ones locked up, actually. I mean, I know several people personally who have, children, family members on the street, and they've begged law enforcement and other, officials to intervene, and they won't.
The family piece is super interesting because the family struggles are so real. I actually just had a colleague who created an app, and I don't remember what it's called, but it was to help family members of people with addictions specifically. Because, I have some family members who've had addictions, and it's just like, you get to a point where they lie to get money, they steal, they lie to get money, they do it over and over again. And then you're kind of like, I'm not giving you anything. And they're like, but I really need it this time. And then you're like, you're really going to have like your family member dying on the street. It's the absolute worst thing. But as opposed to what? You're going to keep giving them money that they're going to just spend on drugs, and that's not helping either. Yeah. And so the situations they're in, and they're totally it just like totally destroys the family members. So they hit a breaking point. And there's usually a lot of the information is you do need to actually set those limits and let them, you can't just keep sending them money or enabling this. But it's easier said than done, if it's your son or something.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
oh, yeah.
It's so hard.
Yeah, in the abstract, I think people just think, oh, throw money at the problem. But then when it comes to their own family members, their own friends, their own loved ones, then they understand that it's not just about the money. I have an aunt who's struggled on and off with addiction for years, and she does better when she doesn't have money. When she is just kind of couch surfing, and people are rationing out. Okay, here's some food. Here's the occasional cigarette. But as soon as she experienced some kind of windfall for one reason or another, she immediately goes on a bender. And so, very clearly, if you have any experience, the answer is not just cash transfers.
Yeah. It's really tough. I mean, I had heard too. I mean, Andrew, you were saying that you had actually worked with somebody or knew somebody who was a sort of pioneer of the harm reduction model or housing first.
I know people who were really into that. And I know people that housing first. Yeah, the organization is called Pathways to Housing in New York.
Yes.
You remember this?
Well, we have this here too, and I mean, yeah, keep going. I've heard some kind of extraordinary stories
of like what did you hear?
Of people like they get an apartment. I mean, so somebody will get in the housing placement, and then they will rent it out to other homeless people. They will go back on the street with their friends and do drugs, and then they will rent out the apartment for prostitution to other.
Okay, so that was one of the most interesting
street campers.
Drug
addicted street campers. What I'm
kind of innovative entrepreneurial spirit.
It's the same thing that I was saying.
Yes, exactly. And you forget the scratch tickets.
But it was like when I would go out and I would buy them, cans of Chef Boyardee, and then they would sell them for drugs or cigarettes. It's the same type of thing. We had people would sell their dependency for tax purposes. So if you count me as a dependent and we'll split the refund that you would get, that was a whole market. Then there was like they would get, because they paid no copay, they would get tons of vitamin prescriptions. And there was a period where they could also get Ensure, like the protein drink Ensure, and the protein drink and the vitamins, and then sell them. But it was just like, because they pay nothing. They pay no copay. It's $0 copay. So if you can sell a $20 thing of vitamins for $2 on the street and get a cigarette. Wow. It's just like that's so insane. The whole thing, like the cashing out of the food stamps and the whole kind of like weird black market economy for benefits dollars was incredibly disheartening. Like just like that's like one of the most demoralizing aspects of.
Yeah. And the drug dealers will come. I mean, right after the first of the month when they're getting their checks, that's when the drug dealers descend, is my understanding, because they've got the cash.
And and then they're on the subway. I mean, I had clients, by the way, people who I worked with, and I would see them on the subway saying, I don't have food or a place to stay. And I'm like, I'm going to your house right now to buy you food right now. And
what would they say? Would you actually have an interaction with them?
I didn't. Okay, poetic license. I never had that exact interaction where.
But I mean, seriously. But what if you were to say? I'm sure you had exchanges with people where you're like, "What? Why are you presenting yourself one way?" And you have this, like, what is actually you're thinking? Like, was there a level of sophistication, or were they just kind of, like I said, laughing? Are we all just marks? Like, are they just laughing at us?
They're laughing at you. That was my sense of like, there are so many food pantries and soup kitchens and places you will never go hungry in New York City. That will not happen. And all the benefits that you can get and everything, including housing. New York State, it's in the Constitution that you have a right to housing.
Shelter. Yeah.
Yes.
So you have a constitutional right to housing in New York State. It's just so much of what is, and then people, and I wonder about the fantasy of the helpers. The people who are giving them money and are imagining themselves being these great helpers, they sometimes really irritate me about, if you really want to help, you would think about what's going to work and be evidence-based here and actually put some thought into it. And if it's just this kind of narcissistic fantasy that you're nurturing and you don't actually give a fuck about any of these people, then just shovel money and then think you're great and don't think about it. But it kind of annoys me that they think they're virtuous or more empathic when they're thinking less about this than we are. You know, it's like they're not invested in actually effective solutions. They just want to feel good about themselves with this fantasy of they're helping the poor person, and they don't care if they're actually ruining their lives.
I know, and I wonder that too. I mean, you hear about these kind of legendary advocates for the homeless, community, and who started the first shelter, no barrier, entry shelter. You can come here, harm reduction model. We're going to have this beautiful place, and you can get clean on your own time. And people who start these things are kind of lionized, and these are great humanitarians. And sometimes there's a religious component, but sometimes there's just kind of like a hippie, kind of 60s idealist component. And then you start to think, like, what's actually going on in your mind? Like, what are you getting out of this? That something that is just so clearly not working, but you are living in this fantasy that you have created something, and you're getting awards for this, and humanitarian awards, and they're having fundraisers and galas and celebrating you, and it's like it's the philanthropy world, and just the psychology of philanthropists and volunteers, and it's a lot of women, by the way. I mean, a lot of, especially like in the animal rescue world, which I've been looking into a little bit. It's like 85% of anybody who's involved in that stuff is women. I mean, there's a kind of toxic empathy, suicidal empathy component to a lot of this.
It feels good to feel like you're helping. I mean, it's
a luxury belief, Rob. This is like right in your lane. I
think, I mean, no, what you're both describing here of, you get to participate in the play acting of helping, but are you really helping anyone? You get the sort of the moral glow of your luxury belief of, donating money or time or what have you, but what difference are you actually making? And in some cases, maybe you're sort of perpetuating the very thing you're claiming to want to stop. I wonder, like, all of these benefits, all of these options for people. I mean, if people know that they'll always have a place to eat and a place to sleep, then there's no pressure or incentive. Each time you come into some cash, if well, I'm going to eat regardless of how I spend this money, so I might as well buy drugs. I might as well buy cigarettes because I know where my next meal is coming from. Versus if you don't know that, that may actually introduce a bit of pressure for you to start to use that money more wisely. And so, this isn't to say, like, I don't think we should have, we shouldn't have shelters and food pantries and so on. But, they may introduce some perverse effects here, unintended consequences.
I have such a good example of this that I want to say before we wrap up. It's not a homeless situation, but it was a benefits-related situation. And this was outpatient. But there was a young man who had attempted suicide, I think around 18, early 20s, around that age. And he was very depressed. He had a hospital stay. But one of the results was he got disability for depression. And his family said, when he started to feel better, he wanted to get a job. And his family said, don't. Because if you get a job, you'll lose that disability and you'll never get it back. If you don't get a job, you've got a guaranteed income for the rest of your life. So if you get a job, it's on you forever. But if you just chill, you can keep this disability for the rest of your life. So the family was encouraging him not to get a job. But that was actually making him more depressed, obviously, because his life was effectively over in his early 20s, where he's just going to basically be poor and useless for his entire life. But the pressure to not lose that the disability was clearly ruining this person's life. And I just have seen perverse incentives like that a lot. And I think it's interesting that social workers aren't more conservative to me in some ways, because they see all this
firsthand.
stuff.
Yeah.
But they double down on it. It's like almost every
Who
time.
becomes a social worker?
Yeah, it's the
question.
women.
The suicidal empathy.
But it's like
It's true.
Yeah.
It's women, but it's like they see all of these programs getting ripped off and creating these perverse incentives and being counterproductive, and they just seem to always double down on it. It's really shocking to me that you'd think more people would have a wake-up call or shift something, but it doesn't happen that often, at least.
That's so interesting. And you know, probably the parents were scared. They were, you know, on some level, they want the best for their kid, and like, oh, God forbid he gets a job and it doesn't work, then where is he? They are looking out for his, they're protecting him. I mean, it is a parental protective instinct. So you can see where they're coming from, even though it's not a very long-term, it's not a very wise goal long term. But yeah, stuff is so tough. But I just wonder if, you know, we are kind of sort of as a civilization sort of reaching the end of this particular kind of, you know, post-war kind of post-60s kind of do-gooder, very carrot and no stick kind of approach to this stuff, because it's just clearly not working.
They're all falsifiable claims. These are all things that you can investigate empirically and come up with answers for what are the different outcomes for different interventions. It's shocking to me that the people develop these interventions are not more evidence-based and thinking about what actually works. And it does seem to me to say that more than anything else makes me question, do you really care, or is this a narcissistic game for you? Because if you really cared, you'd say, we need to figure out what's most effective and be super open-minded about it, because these are people's lives, and let's find the best interventions. But I'm always stunned at how little evidence they're even looking at for these things.
Right. It's the narcissism of the helpers.
Yeah. Right?
I mean, it's true. That's sort of something. What did Mr. Rogers always say? Look for the helpers. Look for the helpers. And then you can look for the narcissists while you're at it. Maybe. I don't know. Wow. Oh, it's so interesting. Well, this is... I can't think of two better people to talk about this with than you guys. So this has been a great privilege.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
I'm curious. Well, is Spencer Pratt really? Do you think he has the authority and the capacity? He's going to change the laws around this, and that these.
I mean it's a much longer conversation. Okay. I mean, Los Angeles has a weak mayor, meaning that the city council has more power than the mayor, and the county board of supervisors has the most power of anybody. I mean, Los Angeles County is huge, and within it is not only the city of LA, but you know. Yeah. Countless little smaller independent municipalities. So there's not much a mayor can do, but I think the mayor, I believe, can say, he does have control over the police department, for instance, can say, okay, go do your job, police officers. Like, okay, we're going to arrest people who are torturing animals, and we're going to, you know, on day one, the party's over, guys. He can do that. I mean, obviously Spencer Pratt, I never saw The Hills. I don't know if you did. So I have that a great advantage. So I'm not, I've no idea what was going on The Hills. But my philosophy with supporting him is that just the fact that he is saying out loud what everybody can see and kind of putting a stop to this, I hate to use the word, but gaslighting, which is what our elected officials have been doing. My hope is that if he were the mayor, he could function as a kind of figurehead and sort of point things out and give voice to people's frustrations, and then hopefully appoint really competent advisors and a team of people who were really aligned with a vision and knew what they were doing. I mean, the Trump comparisons are obvious because this is a reality star, et cetera, et cetera. But he's very un-Trump-like in that way. I mean, Trump is delusional about his own abilities, and Pratt is just sort of like, I don't know, I'm going to find the best person to do this. And so I think that's the difference. I mean, it's very optimistic, and believe me, if we weren't in such desperate straits, and if our options were not so terrible, I would I would be voting for somebody else, but I do think that there's potentially a very interesting path forward. So that's kind of what it feels very utopian in a way. And people are definitely laughing at me and not happy that
there was
I
a very
am
interesting
supporting this
clip
person.
of Karen Bass where someone asked her about, so Spencer Pratt apparently pointed out that there's not been any reconstruction after the fires.
Oh, yeah. I
and,
mean, there's been permits, very few permits have been issued. Yeah.
Someone asked Karen Bass about this. So Spencer Pratt is pointing out the slow efforts toward reconstructing. And she said, why is he exploiting those people's pain? The people who lost their homes, he's exploiting that for political gain. And I thought that's such a it's such a naked, Machiavellian move there of rather than addressing what he actually said, you're making him look bad.
Well,
he's the
and
exploiter.
his house burned down. His house burned down.
He lost a home too.
Exactly.
But it was just this
and
verbal jujitsu move of, well, I'm not going to address the actual issue here. I'm instead going to say he's the exploiter, and I have no responsibility here, even though I'm the mayor and have way more.
That's what
influence over
90% of online discourse sounds like to me, though. People kind of making these like
this is the mayor. This is the mayor of the second
I know,
largest city
the
in the country.
mayor,
This is
and
not
instead
online
of-
discourse, right?
Because she could have said something like he has no idea what he's talking about.
Karen
like we're
Bass
making
said
efforts, we're doing this.
Yes, the
Karen
mayor,
Bass.
Karen
Bass.
she's running. Well, she's running against him. I mean,
Yeah.
she's the incumbent, but
She could have shut him
also
down and said, "Oh, we're doing this, that, and the other. We have this underway.
Right.
These projects. I've appointed these people." Instead, it's, "Oh, he's the one who's exploiting people's pain." Just an incredible response, I thought.
I know. She also said that she had never heard of him until he started running, and it's like, really, he
Okay.
was like the most vocal fire victim in your city. Like
She has to say
and he went to
that, though,
Washington to testify about this.
Yeah.
Like he's one of your constituents.
But in
and
her
you never
defense,
heard of him?
she was on vacation a lot.
She was on. Well, during when the fire started, she was in Ghana.
She hasn't taken
yeah.
any vacations since then.
I doubt it. I mean, look, not an enviable situation for anybody.
That's true. But yeah, well, I don't know. It'd be good. It would be good for people to think more creatively about this. And I do wonder about, I assume that these NGOs do have a lot of like donation money and lobbying money, and there is a little bit of, there's probably corruption and things like that. I mean,
there's a ton. There's a ton. And I mean, he has said that, if he gets elected, that they'll be out of town again. Like half of them will be out of town in 2 weeks, and they'll go up, because they know it's not going to work here anymore. They'll go to another state. But again, I mean, there's only so much. People just are excited about this campaign because he is saying the truth out loud. So my feeling is even if he accomplished nothing or very little, just 4 years of saying the truth out loud would be an improvement over what we've had. And he can save the dogs. He can do that. So for the dogs alone.
it's very empathic of you.
It's my one area of empathy.
Canine
Anyway.
empathy.
All right. Well, great conversation. Thank you both.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.